The following presentation contains very strong language that is not suitable for persons who worship the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Viewer discretion is advised.
Do all good people go to heaven? David, whom the Bible refers to as being a man agreeable to Jehovah's heart, did not ascend to the heavens.
That is a perfectly true statement, but I submit to you that the Watchtower is fully aware of the reason David did not ascend to the heavens. David is dead. From the same book, Reasoning from the Scriptures, pages 99 to 100, it answers the very relevant question, where are the dead, by correctly pointing to Genesis 3:19 and Ecclesiastes 9 verse 10. The dead return to the ground from which they came. So we all know that the dead are in their graves and know nothing. David is in his grave. The Watchtower continues its response to the question, do all good people go to heaven?
Matthew 11 verse 11, Truly I say to you people, among those born of women, there has not been raised up a greater than John the Baptist, but a person that is a lesser one, in the kingdom of the heavens, is greater than he is. So John did not go to heaven when he died.
Like David, John the Baptist is dead. He returned to the dust. He knows nothing. He did not go to heaven, and he did not go to a fiery hell either. The point of Matthew 11:11 is not to demonstrate that John the Baptist is not in heaven, but that even the lesser ones in heaven are greater than the greatest among us on earth. Isn't that clear enough? The Bible is not hard to understand if we stop reading into verses what they are not saying. To answer the question of whether all good people go to heaven, the Watchtower continues.
Psalm 37 verses 9, 11 and 29. Evildoers themselves will be cut off, but those helping in Jehovah are the ones that will possess the earth. The meek ones themselves will possess the earth, and they will indeed find their exquisite delight in the abundance of peace. The righteous themselves will possess the earth, and they will reside forever upon it.
Exactly. No argument there. The meek ones will inherit the earth and reside forever upon it after the millennium, after 1,000 years in heaven. More on that later. Keep watching. In the interest of time, I will not quote what is said about whether Adam would have eventually gone to heaven if he had not sinned. If Lucifer had not sinned, he and a third of the angels would not have been kicked out of heaven. If man had not sinned, the plan of salvation would not have kicked in. We would therefore have no reason to judge angels as we are told we will. More on that later as well. So, I am not concerned about what might have been, but what has indeed taken place and what will take place. Similarly, I will not respond to the unnecessary discussion of whether a person must go to heaven to be truly happy. That is not the point. The point is, the saints will go to heaven.
Is heavenly life set out in the New Testament as the hope for all Christians? John 14 verses 2 and 3. In the house of my Father there are many abodes. Otherwise, I would have told you, because I am going my way to prepare a place for you. Also, if I go my way and prepare a place for you, I am coming again and will receive you home to myself, that where I am, you also may be. Jesus here shows that his faithful apostles, to whom he was speaking, would, in time, be in his Father's house, in heaven, with Jesus. But he does not here say how many others would also go to heaven.
He does not here say how many others would also go to heaven. Interesting. Did he say anywhere else how many would go to heaven? I addressed the question of to whom Jesus was speaking in video 29, but I will say it again. Wasn't it to the faithful apostles that Jesus was speaking when he gave the Great Commission in Matthew 28:19 and 20? Does it mean that the work of evangelism was theirs alone? When you try to teach a false doctrine, you are bound to tie up yourself, contradict the Bible, and contradict your own self, as is coming up.
As many as did receive him, Jesus, to them he gave authority to become God's children, because they were exercising faith in his name, and they were born, not from blood, or from a fleshly will, or from man's will, but from God. Notice that the context, in verse 11, refers to Jesus' own people, the Jews. as many of them as did receive him, when he came to them in the 1st century, became God's children, with heavenly life in view. The verbs in the text are in the past tense, so this passage is not referring to all people who have become Christians since then.
I do not need to demonstrate the falsehood in that statement. The Watchtower itself proved that the statement is garbage in their very next point. But people who are drunk with Watchtower doctrines, who blindly accept what the society teaches, and who refuse to think for themselves, will not open up their eyes to see the contradiction and the inconsistency of the Watchtower.
All who are led by God's Spirit, these are God's sons. The Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit, that we are God's children. If, then, we are children, we are also heirs, heirs indeed of God, but joint heirs with Christ, provided we suffer together that we may also be glorified together.
The deceptive Satan-like organization just tried to deceive people that, when John said, as many as received Jesus, he, Jesus, gave them the authority to become God's children, he was speaking only to the Jews who accepted Jesus at the time. But now, Paul, after Jesus' death and resurrection, says that all who are led by the Spirit are God's children. So it is not only Jews who are children of God, but a lying, conniving organization will be true to its nature and lie about that as well.
At the time this was written, it was true that all who were led by God's Spirit were God's sons, whose hope was that they would be glorified with Christ. But this had not always been true. Luke 1 verse 15 says that John the Baptizer would be filled with Holy Spirit, but Matthew 11:11 makes clear that he will not share in the glory of the heavenly kingdom.
What kind of backward, foolful way of arguing is that? And how on earth does this kind of abject nonsense work with Jehovah's Witnesses? Seriously, are all Jehovah's Witnesses drunk? They are firm believers that they do not have a heavenly hope. Is this the kind of backward reasoning they base that belief on? Notice the stupidity. They claim that at the time when that was written it was true. I thought, therefore, the obvious next argument would have been that it is no longer true today. But lo and behold, that is not what the Watchtower is arguing. It is saying it was not true before, by going back to a nonsensical and untruthful argument about John the Baptist. Even if you bought into that lie, the fact is, it is true today. So what is the Watchtower's point? That it was not always true? Allow me to demonstrate to you how disgustingly deceptive this organization is, why I know that it is fully aware of what it is doing. This is not an organization that has a genuine misunderstanding of the scriptures and is innocently sharing that misunderstanding. This is a satanic body that is deliberately setting out to deceive people, fully aware of what it is doing. In lying to you that it was only the Jews who became children of God, according to John 1 verses 12 and 13, it used grammar as the tool.
The verbs in the text are in the past tense.
But the satanic organization, who clearly understands the past tense, present tense, and future tense, uses the future tense to say,
Matthew 11 verse 11 makes clear that he will not share in the glory of the heavenly kingdom.
That is a vicious, deliberate, and disgusting lie. Read Matthew 11:11 and see if there is any hint that John the Baptist will not, future tense, share in the glory of the heavenly kingdom. The verse does not even hint at that, but the dishonest organization says it makes it clear only to a vicious liar like the Watchtower. Do you know what is particularly strange and peculiar about this false doctrine? These satanic people who are out to deceive others have the audacity, the temerity, the presumptuousness, the gall to suggest that David and John the Baptist will not make it to heaven, but they, the so-called anointed, will.
So too, after the gathering of the heirs of the heavenly kingdom, there would be others who would serve God as followers of his Son, and yet not share in heavenly glory.
So now they attempt to explain how they, the so-called anointed, will be in heaven, while you stay on earth. Hear them.
What specific references are there in the New Testament to a provision for Christians to be rewarded with eternal life on earth? Matthew 5 verse 5. Happy are the mild-tempered ones, since they will inherit the earth.
So, I guess if you do not lose your temper and call them out as I am doing for the disgusting liars that they are, you will inherit the earth. How interesting is it that the Watchtower, in the manual they produced to train Jehovah's Witnesses how to teach their doctrines, in discussing the topic heaven, makes reference to the one beatitude, as they are called in Christendom, of Matthew 5, that speaks to inheriting the earth, and elected not to mention any of the beatitudes that speak about heaven. Remember, the topic of this chapter is heaven. Is that supposed to be a coincidence? It is not by chance. It is by design. But Jehovah's Witnesses, the Watchtower does not have to show you the rest of Matthew 5. You can read it for yourself. You get deceived only because you choose to be deceived. All of the chapter is true, not just verse 5. It is true that those who are conscious of their spiritual need will inherit heaven, according to verse 3, during the millennium. It is true that the mild-tempered will inherit the earth, according to verse 5, after the millennium. It is true that the pure in heart will see God in heaven, according to verse 8, during the millennium. It is true, according to verse 9, that the peaceable Christians will be called the children of God, and as the Watchtower accepted above, the children of God will go to heaven. It is true that those who are persecuted for righteousness will inherit heaven. See verse 10. And verse 11 also teaches the truth, that you will be rewarded in heaven if people persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for Jesus' sake. But the deceiver, in the spirit of Satan, is training you to mention only verse 5, the verse about the earth, when you are reasoning with people from the scriptures about heaven. Dear Jehovah's Witnesses, if the idea that we will all go to heaven for 1,000 years, then come back to earth, sounds strange to you, consider this from the so-called faithful and discreet slave. It was written for you to use when reasoning with non-Jehovah's Witnesses.
What will those who go to heaven do there? They will be priests of God, and of the Christ, and will rule as kings with him for the 1,000 years.
Where will the so-called anointed be after the 1,000 years? The Bible clearly states those going to heaven will do so for 1,000 years. What then? Here is another bit of evidence of the Watchtower's deliberate attempt to deceive you. It continues by citing 1 Corinthians 6 verse 2. You may ask, where is the deception in that? Pay attention. Your translation of the Bible is the only one I've seen where it says the holy ones will judge the earth. All other translations say the saints or God's people will judge the earth. The Watchtower wants to give you the idea that it is only the anointed brethren, so it inserts the words holy ones. But the attempt to deceive you does not end there. This is from the manual it printed to teach you to argue this doctrine. Guess what the very next verse, a verse it carefully did not mention, says.
Know ye not that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life?
Paul is writing to the church at Corinth. He tells them not to take each other to court over differences, but that the issues should be handled within the church. He then reminds them that we will judge angels. He is addressing the entire congregation, not a so-called set of anointed brothers. So it is not some special holy ones who will be judges with Christ in heaven for 1,000 years. All God's children will have the opportunity to judge the world. I will discuss this in a future video. I am so annoyed at this false teaching about a special class going to heaven while others remain on earth, that I really do not have the stomach to endure the rest of the arguments in this one chapter. But, for your sake, because you have been fed on this poisonous diet, I will respond. There is absolutely no argument with the teaching that we will live on earth forever. The Bible clearly teaches that. The issue is that this will not happen in a scenario where one special group goes to heaven and another, obviously the second class, remains on earth. All will go to heaven when Jesus returns to take us home.
Fancy that. The Watchtower's own Bible clearly states that all the living who survives
will be taken up to be with the Lord. Not just some, but everyone. All the living.
And all will return to earth in the holy city when it descends from heaven after the millennium. See video 29.
Matthew 25, verses 31 to 33, 40, and 46. When the Son of Man arrives in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit down on his glorious throne. And all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on his left. The king will say to them, "The sheep, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." And the goats will depart into everlasting cutting off, but the righteous ones, the sheep, into everlasting life.
That was the Watchtower quoting the Bible. Now for their faulty and silly interpretation.
Notice that these sheep are not the same as the king's brothers, who are partakers of the heavenly calling.
Have you noticed that there is no biblical reference? Hebrews 2 verse 10 to 3 verse 1 speaks to, as the Watchtower puts it, the king's brothers who are partakers of the heavenly calling. Where is the evidence or the basis for coming to the conclusion that the sheep are not the same? Is that it, Jehovah's Witnesses? Is that how you accept garbage? The Watchtower says it, so that's the way it is? Have any of you asked your elders to provide you biblical proof that the sheep are not the same as those with a heavenly calling? Is it okay with you that the Watchtower plants something in your mind without any biblical foundation whatsoever?
But these sheep-like ones would be alive during the time that Christ was on his throne, and during the time when some of his brothers would still be experiencing hardship on earth.
Again, not one shred of biblical evidence for that rubbish. The following is the final bit of nonsense that I will address in this video.
I have other sheep, which are not of this fold, those also I must bring, and they will listen to my voice, and they will become one flock, one shepherd. Who are these other sheep? They are followers of the fine shepherd, Jesus Christ, but are not in the new covenant sheepfold, with hope of heavenly life. Yet, they do come to be closely associated with those who are in that sheepfold.
Here is a clue to discovering when the Watchtower is teaching rubbish, and it does a lot of that. Look for those statements with no biblical text after. Open your reasoning book to see if it is me who left off the Bible proofs. Do not take my word for it. I have other sheep which are not of this fold. Those also I must bring. Bring where? Obviously, bring into the fold. Jesus was speaking of the Gentiles who had not yet been baptized into Christ. Certainly, he had been bringing them into his fold for centuries now. Guess what, Jehovah's Witnesses? He was referring to you and me. It is also still futuristic. Other people are out there who are in error. Jesus will bring them into the truth of his word. Other people are out there who have not yet accepted Christ. Them will he bring. Bring where? Into his fold. Into his one fold. His one church. His one body. This is not a symbolic passage of scripture that requires deep theological analysis to understand. That is as simple as ABC. First, the Watchtower has the mighty God and a mighty God. Now you have a two-class congregation, the first class and the second class, the anointed and the other sheep. And Jehovah's Witnesses buy into the nonsense because they do not think for themselves. Folks, I am fully aware that a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. That is why I elected to use soft answers, as it were, in previous videos. But I am also fully aware that my ultimate example, Jesus, became so angry at the way the temple was being used that he chased the money changers out. I am really angry at the way the Watchtower has twisted the scriptures to deceive people. I take serious issue with a bunch of deceivers telling people they have no heavenly hope when Christ has gone to prepare a place for them. The worst part is that the deceivers are saying, "We are going to heaven, you are not." They have the nerve, as a bunch of liars and deceivers, to be declaring themselves as the anointed, while giving others the impression that they do not qualify, that, as it were, God sees them as second-class citizens. There comes a time to take out the whip and give the Watchtower the lashing it deserves. In future videos, I promise to get back to soft answers that turneth away wrath.